My abusive ex Derek threatened every man who looked at me until I started dating an MMA fighter who's 6'5". I'm Madison Foster, 28 years old, and 3 weeks ago at Nostrana downtown, Derek made the biggest mistake of his pathetic life when he approached our table with his usual threatening posture, not realizing that Ryan wasn't like the other guys he'd bullied away from me. The moment Derek grabbed my wrist and pulled me from my chair, Ryan stood up slowly, his massive frame unfolding like something from a nightmare, and Derek's face went from aggressive red to terrified white in less than 2 seconds. The entire restaurant fell silent as Ryan simply placed one hand on Derek's shoulder with the kind of controlled pressure that made Derek's knees visibly buckle, and said in the calmest voice imaginable, "You're going to let go of her now, walk out that door, and never come within 100 feet of Madison again." I should explain how I got here, trapped for 18 months in Derek's suffocating control before finally breaking free. He started so charming at first, the successful sales manager who noticed me at a teacher conference mixer, who seemed protective and attentive. But protective became possessive within weeks. Attentive became surveillance, and his concern for my safety turned into isolation from every friend and male colleague I had. Derek's method was brilliantly calculated and perfectly legal. Nothing that would get him arrested. Just constant psychological warfare. He'd show up at my school during lunch, just to say hi, positioning himself where any male teacher who talked to me could see him watching. He'd send flowers to my classroom with cards that seemed sweet to others but carried veiled threats I understood perfectly. "Hope you're staying safe today. Lots of dangerous people out there." The real damage came through social manipulation. When my friend Tyler from grad school reached out to grab coffee, Derek somehow found out and showed up at the coffee shop, sitting 2 tables away, staring. Tyler never contacted me again. When my colleague James offered to carpool to a conference, Derek called him directly with thinly veiled warnings about respecting boundaries and not wanting there to be any misunderstandings. James requested a different carpool partner the next day. By month 6, I had effectively no male friends, no male colleagues who'd risk casual conversation, and Derek's presence shadowed every aspect of my life. He'd installed a tracking app on my phone for safety, called 12 times a day, just checking in, and had passwords to all my social media accounts so we could share everything. Looking back, I can map exactly how he dismantled my independence piece by piece while everyone around us thought he was just an attentive boyfriend. The breaking point came last November at my school's fundraiser gala. A parent, Marcus Hamilton, approached me to discuss his daughter's reading progress, a completely professional interaction that lasted maybe 4 minutes. Derek materialized beside us mid-conversation, placed his hand on the small of my back with visible possessiveness, and told Marcus with a tight smile that Madison's off the clock for personal conversations. The humiliation of being treated like property in front of a parent, in front of my principal, finally cracked something inside me. I ended it that night, or tried to. Derek's response was predictable in its horror. Tears first, promising to change, then anger when tears didn't work, then threats when anger didn't work. He told me no one else would ever want me, that he'd make sure of it, that every guy who tried would regret it. I got a restraining order after he showed up at my apartment at 2 a.m, pounding on the door. But restraining orders only work if police are already there when violations occur. The next 4 months were a different kind of hell. Derek couldn't contact me directly without violating the order, but he could watch from legal distances, could coincidentally be at the same grocery store, same park, same restaurants, and he could absolutely approach any man he saw me with, since the restraining order only protected me, not others. 2 guys I went on first dates with received threatening calls afterward. 1 got followed home. Both ghosted me immediately. I stopped dating entirely. Stopped going anywhere I might meet someone. Basically gave Derek exactly what he wanted through his campaign of intimidation. My best friend Jenna kept telling me I couldn't let him win, that I deserved to live my life, but she didn't understand the calculated terror of Derek's approach. He never did anything quite illegal enough for serious consequences, just enough to make every man in Portland apparently decide I wasn't worth the trouble. Then in March, Jenna practically dragged me to a self-defense workshop at Iron Will MMA gym on SE Hawthorne. I went reluctantly, expecting the usual ineffective knee them in the groin advice, but the instructor teaching that day was different. Ryan Carter moved through the room with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from actual dangerous capability, not performed aggression. He was massive, 6.5 of controlled power, but his teaching style was patient and encouraging, focused on practical techniques rather than machismo displays. After class, Jenna not so subtly engineered a conversation between us while picking up her gym bag. Ryan mentioned he taught regular classes and offered a free trial session. Something about his complete lack of performance, the way he treated me like a person rather than a potential conquest or a victim, made me agree. I showed up the next week for his evening fundamentals class and discovered that physical capability creates a different kind of confidence than I'd ever experienced. Over the next month, I attended 3 classes weekly, learning actual defensive techniques while my body got stronger and my mind clearer. Ryan treated all his students with the same respectful professionalism, never crossing boundaries or making anyone uncomfortable. His philosophy was empowerment through skill, not fear through warnings. I found myself looking forward to classes, then looking forward to seeing him specifically, then realizing I was developing feelings for the first time since Derek. The shift happened gradually. Ryan started waiting after class to talk about technique, then about life, then about everything. We discovered shared interests in true crime podcasts and terrible horror movies. He told me about his fighting career, the discipline required, the mental game of facing someone trying to hurt you. I told him about teaching 3rd graders, the joy of watching concepts click for struggling readers. Eventually, he asked if I'd like to get coffee outside the gym, and I realized I wanted to say yes, but needed him to understand what saying yes meant. I explained Derek in the parking lot of Iron Will, the whole ugly story of control and threats, and the systematic campaign to isolate me. I told Ryan about the restraining order, about the guys who'd been scared off, about Derek's pattern of showing up wherever I went. I expected Ryan to politely distance himself like everyone else had, to decide I wasn't worth the drama. Instead, he listened carefully, nodded once, and said, "That sounds really difficult, Madison, but I'm not them, and I'd still like to take you to coffee if you're interested." Our first date was at the Daily Grind on Morrison Street, deliberately public, deliberately during daylight hours. Ryan arrived exactly on time, held the door, listened more than he talked, treated me like someone whose thoughts mattered. We stayed for 3 hours, conversation flowing easily, and when he walked me to my car, Derek was already there, leaning against the driver's side door with his arms crossed. The confrontation was Derek's standard performance, aggressive posturing designed to intimidate. He stepped forward, invaded Ryan's space, did the chest-puffing thing that had worked on Tyler and James and the others. Ryan simply stood there, a full 7 inches taller, 70 pounds heavier, calm as glass. Derek started his usual script about how I was his girl and guys needed to respect that, and Ryan interrupted with zero emotion to say, "Madison's told me about you and the restraining order. You should leave now before you violate it." Something in Ryan's complete lack of reaction seemed to confuse Derek, whose tactics depended on triggering fear or matching aggression. He tried louder volume, more theatrical anger, even stepped forward aggressively. Ryan didn't move, didn't react, just stood there with the stillness of someone who'd been punched in the face professionally hundreds of times and wasn't impressed by Derek's performance. Finally, Derek spat something about, "This isn't over," and walked away, his threat suddenly impotent against someone who simply refused to be threatened. Ryan asked if I was okay, if I wanted to file a police report about the violation, if I needed anything. His concern was genuine but not performative, practical rather than patronizing. I realized in that moment that Derek's power had always been built on others' fear, and Ryan simply didn't have that fear to exploit. We went on our coffee date again 2 days later, and Derek showed up again, and Ryan's response was identical, calm removal of threat through sheer physical presence. Over the next 2 months, Derek tried every variation of his intimidation playbook. He followed us to movies, restaurants, parks. He sent messages through mutual acquaintances. He ramped up social media surveillance, commenting on my posts with thinly veiled threats disguised as concern. And every single time, Ryan's response was the same measured calm, the kind that comes from actual capability rather than performed toughness. Derek seemed genuinely baffled that his tactics weren't working. Our relationship deepened naturally despite Derek's shadow. Ryan never tried to control where I went or who I talked to, never demanded access to my phone or social media, never showed up uninvited or made me feel watched. The contrast with Derek's suffocating surveillance was so stark, It made me realize how thoroughly Derek had warped my understanding of normal relationship dynamics. Ryan's respect for my autonomy felt revolutionary after 18 months of Derek's control. By month 6 of dating Ryan, Derek's frustration had become obvious. His tactics weren't working, I wasn't isolating myself, and Ryan refused to be scared away. Derek started showing up more frequently, his threats escalating from veiled to explicit. He told Ryan at a grocery store that accidents happen to guys who don't listen. He left notes on my car about how new boyfriends don't last. His messages to Jenna included threats about Ryan learning respect the hard way. Ryan's response was to document everything, file additional police reports, and continue treating Derek like a minor annoyance rather than a serious threat. But I could see Derek spiraling, his control slipping away, his identity as the intimidating presence who kept other men away completely dismantled by Ryan's refusal to play the game. Something was building toward confrontation, Derek's need to reassert dominance clearly growing with each failed intimidation attempt. 3 weeks ago, Ryan surprised me with reservations at Nostrana, one of Portland's nicest Italian restaurants downtown. We were celebrating my acceptance into a graduate program for literacy education, sitting at a corner table, holding hands across the tablecloth, when I felt the familiar dread settle into my stomach. Derek had somehow found us again, was standing at the host station, staring directly at our table with an expression I'd never seen before, something beyond anger into pure rage. Derek didn't wait for the host to seat him. He walked straight toward our table, weaving between other diners with that determined stride I recognized from our worst fights. Several people glanced up as he passed, sensing the tension radiating from him. Ryan noticed my expression change and turned calmly to see what had caught my attention, his body language shifting subtly into something more alert, without appearing threatened. "Madison, we need to talk," Derek announced, ignoring Ryan entirely as he reached our table. His voice was loud enough that nearby conversations paused. "This has gone on long enough. You're making a huge mistake with this guy." "There's a restraining order," I said quietly, my hands trembling slightly despite trying to project calm. "You're violating it right now." "Restraining orders are for criminals," Derek shot back, his face flushed. "I'm trying to protect you from making terrible decisions. This guy..." He finally acknowledged Ryan with a dismissive gesture. "He's just using you, Madison. He'll get bored and move on, but I actually care about you." Ryan set down his wine glass with deliberate care. "Derek, you need to leave. This is harassment, it's illegal, and Madison has made her choices clear." "Oh, so the roid monkey speaks," Derek sneered, his confidence seeming to build despite Ryan's size advantage. "You think because you're big that makes you tough? I've dealt with guys like you before. All muscle, no brain." "I think you should walk away before this gets worse for you," Ryan replied, his tone still conversational but carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. "Madison and I are trying to have dinner. You're ruining multiple people's evenings, not just ours." Derek's response was to reach across the table and grab my wrist, pulling hard enough to jerk me forward in my seat. "Come on, Madison. Let's go outside and talk like adults without your bodyguard." The pain in my wrist was sharp, his grip crushing the delicate bones together like he'd done during our worst arguments. I tried to pull back, but his fingers only tightened. That familiar demonstration of physical control he'd used so many times to make his point. The fear that flooded through me was visceral and immediate, 18 months of conditioning making my body respond with frozen compliance, even as my mind screamed resistance. Ryan stood up. The movement was fluid and unhurried, his 6'5" frame unfolding from the chair with the kind of controlled power that comes from years of disciplined training. He didn't rush, didn't appear angry, just rose to his full height while his hand moved to rest on Derek's shoulder. The grip looked gentle, almost casual, but I saw Derek's entire body stiffen as Ryan's fingers found pressure points with surgical precision. "Let go of her wrist," Ryan said, his voice dropping to something quiet and absolutely certain. "Do it now." Derek's face went through a remarkable transformation. The aggressive red drained away, replaced by a grayish pallor as whatever Ryan was doing to his shoulder sent pain signals his brain couldn't ignore. His fingers loosened on my wrist automatically, his body's survival instinct overriding his conscious intentions. I pulled my arm back, cradling it against my chest as the restaurant staff finally started moving toward us. "You're hurting me," Derek gasped, trying to pull away from Ryan's grip and discovering he couldn't move. "Let go. You're assaulting me." "I'm preventing you from assaulting Madison," Ryan corrected, still in that unnaturally calm voice. "Now you're going to walk out of this restaurant, get in your car, and drive away. If you ever approach Madison again, ever contact her, ever come near her, what I'm doing to your shoulder right now will seem gentle. Do you understand me?" The manager arrived with 2 servers, one already on the phone with police. Other diners had their phones out, recording the confrontation from multiple angles. Derek seemed to realize suddenly how completely the situation had turned against him. Surrounded by witnesses, caught on camera violating a restraining order, physically overpowered by someone who made his previous intimidation tactics look pathetic. "I understand," Derek managed, his voice strangled with pain and humiliation. "Just let me go." Ryan released him and Derek stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. For just a moment, his expression shifted into something beyond anger, into genuine hatred mixed with fear. He looked at me with eyes that promised this wasn't over, that he'd find a way to make me pay for this humiliation, then turned and pushed past the gathering staff toward the exit. The manager apologized profusely, offered to comp our meal, asked if we wanted to press charges. Ryan calmly provided contact information for the police report, explained about the existing restraining order, mentioned that Derek had physically grabbed me. Several other diners offered to provide their video footage as evidence. Through it all, I sat there shaking, adrenaline flooding my system as the fear finally released its grip. When the immediate chaos settled and police had taken our statements, Ryan sat back down and reached across the table, offering his hand palm up rather than grabbing mine. "Are you okay? Do you want to leave?" "I don't know," I admitted honestly, my wrist already showing red marks from Derek's grip. That was terrifying, but also, he looked scared. Derek's never looked scared before. He's always been the one making others afraid. "Men like Derek are cowards," Ryan said matter-of-factly. "They only target people they think can't fight back. The moment they encounter actual resistance, they fold. He'll probably leave you alone now." But I knew Derek better than that. His entire identity was built on being the intimidating presence, the guy who kept other men away from me, the protector who was actually a controller. Tonight hadn't scared him into backing off. It had wounded something deeper than fear. It had humiliated him publicly, captured on multiple cameras, made him look weak in front of dozens of witnesses. Derek's ego couldn't absorb that kind of blow without retaliation. Over the next few days, the warning signs appeared. Derek created new social media accounts to get around my blocks, sending messages that walked the legal line between threat and concern. He drove past my apartment building multiple times daily, always staying just outside the technical violation distance but making his presence known. He called my school's main line asking to speak with me about urgent family matters, forcing the secretary to tell him repeatedly that I'd instructed no calls from him be put through. Most concerning were the messages he sent to Ryan through gym review sites and social media. They started with fake concern about Ryan's aggressive behavior at the restaurant, painting himself as the victim of assault. Then they shifted to research into Ryan's fighting record, pointing out losses and injuries with thinly veiled implications. Finally, they became direct challenges, suggesting Ryan was only tough against untrained civilians and would fold against someone who knows how to handle themselves. Ryan showed me these messages with the same calm he'd displayed at Nostrana, documenting everything, forwarding it all to police and his attorney. But I could see something shifting in his assessment of Derek, a recognition that this wasn't going to resolve itself through restraining orders and documentation. Derek's psychological profile was becoming clearer. A narcissist whose identity required dominance, now facing permanent ego destruction unless he could somehow reassert control. "He's going to try something," I told Ryan one evening at his apartment, scrolling through Derek's latest fake account messages. "He can't let this go. His whole sense of self depends on being the intimidating one." "Let him try," Ryan replied, though I noticed his hand moved unconsciously to his phone, checking the security camera app he'd installed at my building. "I've fought professionally for 8 years, Madison. I've been hit by people with actual training and skill. Derek's just a sad guy with control issues and zero real capability." The confrontation came 2 weeks after Nostrana, but not in any way I'd anticipated. Derek's new strategy revealed itself through absence rather than presence. For 5 days, the constant surveillance stopped. No drive-bys past my apartment, no fake social media accounts, no messages through intermediaries. The sudden silence was more unnerving than his previous escalation, like a storm system going quiet right before touching down. Ryan noticed it too, his casual checks of my building's security feeds becoming more frequent. He's planning something, I told Jenna over coffee at the Daily Grind, the same place Ryan and I had our first date. Derek doesn't just give up. This quiet means he's shifting tactics. Jenna had been urging me to get a security system upgrade, maybe even consider moving to a building with better access control. But part of me refused to let Derek's campaign of intimidation uproot my entire life again. I'd already lost 18 months to his control during our relationship and 4 months to his stalking afterward. At some point, I needed to reclaim my existence rather than constantly retreating from his shadow. The trap revealed itself through a mutual acquaintance named Travis, someone Derek and I both knew from the teacher conference circuit. Travis reached out via email with what seemed like a genuine professional opportunity, a literacy workshop presentation that paid exceptionally well and could boost my graduate school application. The venue was a conference center I'd presented at before. The date worked with my schedule, and the coordinator's contact information checked out when I verified it. I should have been more suspicious of the timing, of Travis suddenly appearing in my life after months of silence, of an opportunity that seemed almost too perfectly calibrated to my interests. But the email thread included legitimate conference materials, registration confirmations, even a contract from what appeared to be the actual education nonprofit sponsoring the event. Every detail checked out when I researched it, right down to the venue booking confirmation. Ryan offered to come with me, take a day off from teaching at Iron Will to be there for support. I declined, not wanting to appear unprofessional by bringing a date to a work function, not realizing I was following exactly the script Derek had written. The workshop was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at a conference center in Beaverton, about 30 minutes from downtown Portland. I arrived 15 minutes early, as was my habit for professional presentations. The parking lot was oddly empty for a Saturday conference, but I rationalized that attendees might be using the attached parking structure. The building's main entrance was unlocked. The lobby silent, but nothing seemed immediately wrong. The directory showed my workshop room was conference room C on the second floor. The elevator ride up gave me the first concrete warning sign when I noticed the building felt completely abandoned, none of the usual conference buzz of voices and activity. I pulled out my phone to call the coordinator contact, then realized I had no cell service. The conference center was supposedly undergoing network upgrades, according to a sign in the lobby, but the timing suddenly felt suspicious. Conference room C's door was closed but unlocked. I pushed it open to find a standard setup. Rows of chairs, presentation screen, podium. And Derek, sitting calmly in the front row, arms crossed, that familiar, controlling smile on his face. "Hello, Madison," he said pleasantly, as if we'd run into each other at a grocery store rather than him having orchestrated an elaborate trap. "Thanks for coming. We really need to talk without your attack dog around." My hand was already on my phone, pulling up Ryan's contact, when Derek stood and gestured to the window. "No service in here, I'm afraid. Something about the building's metal framework interfering with signals. And before you think about running, Travis is downstairs by the exit. He's convinced you and I just need privacy to work out our misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," I said, forcing my voice to stay level despite the fear constricting my chest. "You're violating the restraining order. This is kidnapping, Derek. Do you understand how illegal this is?" "Kidnapping requires force," Derek corrected, moving slowly down the aisle between chairs. "You came here voluntarily for a professional opportunity. We're just two adults having a conversation in a public building. No one's forcing you to stay, though I'd suggest hearing me out before you make another mistake." The rational part of my brain was cataloging exit routes, assessing Derek's position relative to the door, calculating whether I could get past him. But 18 months of his psychological conditioning created a paralyzing conflict between my survival instincts screaming to run and the trained compliance he'd installed through countless smaller confrontations. "What do you want?" I asked, staying near the door, ready to bolt despite his blocking position. "I want you to understand what you're throwing away," Derek replied, his tone shifting into the reasonable, concerned voice he'd used so effectively to manipulate me before. "Ryan's not who you think he is, Madison. I've done research. He's got a history of violence, multiple assault charges that were dropped, ex-girlfriends with restraining orders against him." "That's not true," I said automatically, though doubt crept in despite myself. How well did I actually know Ryan's history? "It's all true," Derek insisted, pulling out printed papers from a folder on one of the chairs. "Police reports, court documents, witness statements. Your hero is just better at hiding his violence behind that calm act. I'm trying to protect you from making a terrible mistake." He approached slowly, offering the papers like evidence, and I made the critical error of glancing down at them. In that split second of distraction, Derek closed the distance between us, his hand shooting out to grip my upper arm. Not enough to bruise, not enough to leave marks, just enough to establish physical control. "Let me go," I said, trying to pull away and finding his grip immovable. "After you listen," Derek replied, his reasonable voice developing an edge. "I've invested 2 years in this relationship, Madison. 2 years of being there for you, protecting you, caring about your well-being, and you're throwing it away for some violent gym rat who'll use you up and move on." The papers he'd shown me were fabrications, I realized suddenly. Ryan's fighting record was public, his professional conduct impeccable, but Derek had enough technical skill to create convincing forgeries, and he'd counted on my momentary doubt to get close enough to grab me. The situation was degrading rapidly from trap to assault. "Derek, you need to let me go right now," I said, abandoning the calm approach for clear, loud assertion. "This is assault. Travis might be downstairs, but there are cameras in this building. You're recording yourself committing a crime." His face darkened at the mention of cameras, his grip tightening slightly on my arm. "The cameras have been off since Friday. Building maintenance very convenient. And Travis thinks we're having a mature conversation about getting back together. No one's coming to save you, Madison. Not your MMA fighter, not the police, no one. It's just you and me, finally able to talk honestly." My self-defense training from Ryan's classes kicked in almost involuntarily. Instead of pulling away from Derek's grip, I rotated my arm sharply inward while stepping back, breaking his hold using the technique Ryan had drilled into muscle memory. Derek's surprise gave me the seconds I needed to create distance, moving around the podium to put furniture between us. "Don't be dramatic," Derek snapped, his reasonable mask slipping entirely now. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just need you to listen, to understand what you're doing to us." "There is no us," I said firmly, continuing to maintain distance as Derek circled toward me. "There hasn't been since last November. You're stalking me, Derek. You're harassing me. And now you've lured me here under false pretenses to intimidate me into getting back together. None of that is love. It's control." Something shifted in Derek's expression, the last vestiges of his reasonable performance crumbling into rage. "Control? I gave you everything. I protected you, guided you, kept you safe from guys who just wanted to use you. And this is how you repay me? By humiliating me in front of everyone at that restaurant, letting your boyfriend assault me, turning me into a joke?" His voice had risen to a shout, all pretense of calm conversation abandoned. I realized with sick clarity that Derek had truly convinced himself of his own narrative, that he was the victim here, that his campaign of surveillance and intimidation had been protective rather than abusive. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain that delusion was fracturing under the weight of reality. "I'm leaving," I announced, moving toward the door with as much confidence as I could project. "You can stay here or follow me, but either way, I'm calling police the moment I'm outside." Derek moved to block the door, his larger frame filling the exit. "We're not done talking." "Yes, we are," I replied, pulling out the personal alarm Ryan had insisted I carry. "Move, or I'll use this." For a long moment, we stood in standoff, Derek's need to reassert control warring with his recognition that the situation was slipping beyond his management. The personal alarm in my hand was loud enough to draw attention from anywhere in the building, even if Travis was the only other person present. And creating a scene would destroy Derek's narrative that this was just a conversation between adults. "You're making a huge mistake," Derek said finally, stepping aside with visible reluctance. "When Ryan shows his true colors, when he hurts you like I know he will, don't come crying to me." You had someone who actually cared about you, and you threw it away. I walked past him carefully, keeping the alarm ready, hyper-aware of his proximity. My entire body was shaking with adrenaline, fight-or-flight chemicals flooding my system as I made it through the door and into the hallway. The elevator seemed impossibly far away, Derek's footsteps echoing behind me as he followed at a distance. Travis was indeed waiting in the lobby, confusion on his face as I emerged from the elevator with Derek trailing behind. "Did you guys work things out?" he asked hopefully, clearly believing Derek's manipulation about us just needing to talk. "Travis, there was never a workshop," I said quickly, pulling out my phone and finding service had returned. "Derek created a fake email account to lure me here. He's been stalking me for months. There's a restraining order. You need to understand you've been used as part of harassment." Travis's expression shifted from confusion to horror as he processed this, looking between me and Derek with dawning realization. "Derek, you said Madison wanted to surprise you, that she'd asked me to help set up a reconciliation meeting." "She's lying," Derek interjected smoothly. "She's trying to turn you against me because she's embarrassed about her violent boyfriend. Ask her about Ryan assaulting me at Nostrana." But I was already calling Ryan, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. He answered on the first ring, his voice immediately alert. "Madison? Are you okay?" "I'm at the Beaverton Conference Center," I managed, my voice cracking despite trying to stay calm. "Derek lured me here with a fake workshop. I'm okay, I got away from him, but I need you to come. And I think we need to call police." "I'm on my way," Ryan said immediately, and I heard keys jingling, his apartment door closing. "Stay on the phone with me. Are you safe right now? Is Derek still there?" "I'm in the lobby. Travis is here, Derek's here, but I'm not trapped anymore." The reality of what had just happened was starting to penetrate my adrenaline fog. He grabbed me, Ryan. He had fake documents. He planned this whole thing to get me alone. Derek must have realized how completely his trap had backfired, how Travis was now looking at him with suspicion rather than sympathy, how my phone call to Ryan meant witnesses would arrive soon. He turned and walked quickly toward the parking lot exit without another word, his retreat anticlimactic after the intensity of the confrontation. Travis apologized profusely, explaining how Derek had contacted him weeks ago with the elaborate story about wanting to surprise me, providing fake conference materials, coaching him on what to say. The manipulation had been comprehensive and calculated, exploiting Travis's good intentions to create the isolation Derek needed. When police arrived 20 minutes later, Travis's statement corroborated everything, his genuine shock at being used lending credibility to my account. Ryan pulled into the parking lot as I was giving my statement to officers, his truck barely in park before he was out and moving toward me with controlled urgency. The relief that flooded through me at seeing him was overwhelming. The contrast between Derek's suffocating control and Ryan's protective presence suddenly crystalline clear. The officers took detailed statements, photographed the red marks on my arm from Derek's grip, collected the fake documents he'd prepared, and verified the elaborate email trail he'd created. The detective who arrived explained this elevated the charges significantly: stalking, harassment, false imprisonment, assault. Combined with the restraining order violations, Derek was looking at serious criminal consequences. "He's escalating," the detective said bluntly after reviewing Derek's history. "This level of planning, the elaborate setup, indicates he's not going to stop on his own. We'll issue a warrant for his arrest, but you need to take additional precautions. Security systems, varying your routines, documenting everything." Ryan drove me home, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "I should have insisted on coming with you. I knew something felt wrong about that workshop timing." "This isn't your fault," I said quietly. Derek's tactics rely on separating his targets from support systems. He engineered this specifically to get me alone, knowing I'd refuse to bring you to a professional event. I walked right into it, but something had shifted during the conference center confrontation. The fear Derek had cultivated through 18 months of relationship control and 6 months of stalking had cracked when I'd used Ryan's training to break his grip, when I'd asserted my right to leave, despite his intimidation. Derek's power had always been psychological, built on my compliance, and watching it fail had revealed the fragility underlying his controlling facade. The question now was how he'd respond to this latest humiliation, to the escalating criminal charges, to the complete failure of his elaborate trap, and whether the final confrontation he seemed determined to force would end with Derek finally accepting defeat or attempting something even more desperate. Derek didn't run. That was the first surprise when police went to arrest him the following morning. Most stalkers in his position would flee, disappear across state lines, try to evade consequences. But Derek's pathology wouldn't allow retreat without one more attempt at reasserting dominance. When officers arrived at his apartment, he was calm, cooperative, and immediately posted bail through his attorney with the casual efficiency of someone who'd anticipated this outcome. The second surprise came when Derek's lawyer filed counterclaims alleging Ryan had assaulted him at Nostrana, that I had defamed his character, that the restraining order was based on false allegations. The legal maneuvering was transparently frivolous, but it served Derek's actual purpose, forcing continued contact through the court system, maintaining his presence in my life through litigation even as criminal charges proceeded. He's trying to maintain control through any means available, Ryan's attorney explained during an emergency meeting. The counterclaims won't succeed, but they'll drag you both through depositions, court appearances, legal expenses. It's harassment by bureaucracy. What Derek didn't anticipate was how completely his trap at the conference center had destroyed any remaining credibility. Travis's statement, the fake documents, the email trail, my arm bruises, all combined into overwhelming evidence of premeditation and escalation. The judge overseeing the restraining order violation scheduled an expedited hearing and significantly tightened Derek's release conditions: GPS monitoring, prohibition from all areas where I might frequent, surrender of firearms, mandatory psychiatric evaluation. But GPS monitoring only tracks where someone is, not what they're planning. And Derek's social media activity, conducted through proxies and fake accounts, revealed someone spiraling into increasingly desperate justifications. He posted long manifestos about toxic masculinity and violent men who manipulated women. He shared articles about false restraining orders and men destroyed by vindictive exes. His entire online presence became a monument to victimhood, himself as the wronged party persecuted for caring too much. Ryan showed me these posts with concern rather than anger. He's building a narrative to justify something. This level of self-justification usually precedes escalation. The escalation came 3 days after Derek's arrest, but not directed at me. Derek showed up at Iron Will MMA during Ryan's evening fundamentals class, walking through the front entrance with the casual confidence of someone who believed they'd found a loophole in his restrictions. The gym wasn't technically a place I frequented, therefore technically not prohibited. His GPS tracker showing he'd stayed outside the legal radius of my apartment and school. Marcus, the gym owner, intercepted Derek immediately. "You need to leave. This is private property." "I'm here to sign up for classes," Derek announced loudly, ensuring the entire gym could hear him. "I want to learn from the best, and I hear Ryan Carter is an excellent instructor." Unless there's some reason I'm not welcome. Discrimination based on personal relationships, perhaps? The trap was obvious. If Ryan refused to interact with Derek, it could feed the harassment counterclaims. If Ryan accepted Derek as a student, it would force repeated contact in an environment where Derek could provoke confrontation while surrounded by witnesses. Either outcome served Derek's need to manufacture situations where he maintained presence in Ryan's life, by extension in mine. Ryan's response was characteristically direct. "Marcus, please call the police. Derek has an active restraining order prohibiting contact with anyone connected to Madison. As her boyfriend, that includes me. This is violation number 3. "That's not what the order says," Derek countered, pulling out his phone to display the legal language. "It prohibits contact with Madison Foster specifically. You're not mentioned anywhere in this document. I have every right to be here as a paying customer." The legal gray area was deliberate, exploiting the precise wording of protection orders that typically name only the protected party. But Ryan had anticipated this exact scenario, had consulted with attorneys about how Derek might attempt proxy contact. Marcus had standing to remove anyone from his private business for any reason, and police could arrest Derek for trespassing if he refused to leave. What happened next, Derek didn't plan for. 3 other students from Ryan's class, all regulars who'd heard about the stalking situation, positioned themselves between Derek and Ryan without being asked. Tyler, a competitive heavyweight fighter. Carlos, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu brown belt. Amanda, a former kickboxing champion. all three training partners who'd become protective of their instructor and his relationship. "Time to go," Tyler said simply, his massive frame making Derek look slight by comparison. Derek's confidence evaporated as he realized he was surrounded by trained fighters in peak physical condition, his usual intimidation tactics completely impotent in this environment. "You can't assault me. There are cameras everywhere. I'll sue this entire gym." "No one's assaulting you," Ryan said calmly. "These are gym members concerned about a situation affecting their training environment. Marcus has asked you to leave his private property. You're now trespassing. Your choice is to walk out voluntarily or be escorted by police. There is no third option where you stay and harass me." Police arrived within minutes, Marcus having called the moment Derek entered. The responding officers recognized Derek immediately from previous incidents, their body language shifting to professional wariness. Derek tried his cooperative routine again, but the GPS data showed a clear pattern. He'd deliberately positioned himself at the gym during times he knew Ryan would be teaching, demonstrating intentional proximity rather than innocent coincidence. "Mr. Walsh, you're being arrested for violation of protective order, third occurrence," the senior officer stated while his partner prepared handcuffs. "This time, you're not getting bail." Derek's mask finally cracked completely. "This is ridiculous. I have rights. You can't arrest me for signing up for fitness classes. Ryan's the one who should be arrested for what he did at Nostrana. Ask anyone who was there. He assaulted me." "We have the Nostrana security footage," the officer replied while cuffing Derek. "You grabbed Ms. Foster's wrist. Mr. Carter intervened to stop an assault in progress. Multiple witnesses confirmed you were the aggressor. Now you've violated the order 3 times in 10 days, demonstrating clear escalation. The judge isn't going to be sympathetic." As they led Derek toward the patrol car, he turned to deliver one final threat loud enough for the entire gym to hear. "This isn't over, Ryan. You think you're tough because you beat up people in a cage? I'll show you what real consequences look like. Madison's going to realize what kind of violent animal she's dating." Ryan didn't respond, didn't react, just stood there with that same calm I'd seen at Nostrana. But several gym members had their phones out, recording Derek's threat, adding it to the growing documentation of his inability to accept reality. The hearing for Derek's third violation occurred 2 days later. I sat in the courtroom gallery beside Ryan, watching as Derek's attorney tried desperately to frame his client's pattern of behavior as misunderstandings and coincidences. The judge, a stern woman with 20 years on the bench, was having none of it. "Mr. Walsh, I'm looking at a pattern of escalating violations despite multiple warnings," she said after reviewing the case file. "The conference center incident involved elaborate premeditation and deception. The gym incident demonstrates you're seeking confrontation rather than avoiding contact as ordered. Your social media activity shows fixation and deteriorating judgment. I'm revoking your bail and ordering immediate psychiatric evaluation before we proceed with criminal charges." Derek's face went through rapid emotional shifts: disbelief, rage, panic, before settling into cold hatred directed entirely at me. Even as bailiffs moved to return him to custody, his eyes stayed locked on mine, promising retribution no matter what legal consequences he faced. The prosecutor approached us after the hearing. "He's going to be held for at least 60 days pending evaluation. That gives us time to build the full criminal case. But Ms. Foster, you need to understand that detention doesn't eliminate risk. Derek has friends, resources, and online following who've bought into his victim narrative. Some of them might act on his behalf." That warning proved prescient 48 hours later, when my apartment building's security system alerted at 3 a.m. Someone had attempted to access the garage entry, been denied by the keycard system, then tried to force the lock. By the time police arrived, the person had fled, but they'd left graffiti on the garage door. Violent men get what's coming. The graffiti incident triggered a cascade of escalating security measures. Ryan insisted I stay at his apartment while we installed comprehensive security at mine. Reinforced locks, camera system, motion sensors. My school's administration was notified about the situation, security staff briefed, protocols established for anyone asking about me or attempting campus access. The restraining order was amended to include Derek's known associates, after police identified 2 of his friends as potential threat actors. But the most significant consequence emerged from the psychiatric evaluation Derek was undergoing in custody. The court-appointed psychologist's preliminary report, shared with prosecutors, painted a disturbing picture of obsessive fixation combined with narcissistic personality disorder and deteriorating reality testing. Derek had apparently spent months building an elaborate justification system, where every action I took was evidence of manipulation by Ryan, every legal consequence proof of conspiracy against him. The evaluator believes he's at high risk for violence if released, the prosecutor explained during a meeting at her office. His fixation has intensified rather than decreased with forced separation. He's constructed a delusional narrative where Ryan is the villain and he's the heroic protector. That combination of delusion and narcissistic injury creates dangerous unpredictability. The criminal trial was expedited given the evaluation findings. Derek's attorney negotiated a plea arrangement, guilty to stalking, harassment, and multiple restraining order violations in exchange for a recommendation of psychiatric treatment facility rather than traditional incarceration. The prosecutor reluctantly agreed, believing Derek needed treatment more than punishment, though the sentence would still involve years of secured confinement. I testified at the sentencing hearing, describing the 18 months of relationship control, the 6 months of stalking, the conference center trap, the systematic campaign to isolate me. The judge listened with visible concern, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific incidents. Derek sat at the defense table expressionless, apparently medicated, his previous rage replaced by disturbing blankness. "Mr. Walsh, your actions represent a profound failure to respect another person's autonomy and legal boundaries," the judge stated during sentencing. "The psychological evaluation indicates you genuinely believe yourself to be a victim, which makes you particularly dangerous. I'm sentencing you to 7 years in a secure psychiatric facility with mandatory treatment. Upon release, you'll be subject to lifetime restraining order and supervised probation. You are not to have any contact with Ms. Foster or Mr. Carter, directly or indirectly, for the remainder of your life." Derek showed no reaction to the sentence, though his parents seated behind him broke down crying. I felt conflicted watching them, recognizing they'd raised someone whose need for control had metastasized into this destructive obsession, but also recognizing Derek had made his own choices at every turn. Outside the courthouse, media had gathered after Derek's online followers publicized his story as an example of men persecuted by vindictive exes. Ryan positioned himself between me and the cameras, physically blocking their angles while we walked to his truck. Several people shouted questions, trying to provoke reaction, but we stayed silent until safely away. The weeks following sentencing brought unexpected peace. No more constant surveillance, no more carefully planned routes to avoid Derek's presence, no more fear that every doorbell ring might be him ignoring the restraining order. The relief was profound, but also complicated by anger at how much of my life Derek had stolen through his systematic campaign of control. Ryan suggested therapy to process the trauma, recognizing that legal resolution didn't automatically heal psychological wounds. I started seeing Dr. Helena Reeves, a specialist in intimate partner violence, who helped me understand how Derek's tactics had exploited normal relationship dynamics. The control had been gradual enough that I'd normalized each incremental escalation, each new boundary violation, until I was completely isolated and psychologically dependent on his approval. "You're not responsible for his actions," Dr. Reeves reminded me during sessions where guilt threatened to overwhelm me. "Derek made deliberate choices to control, manipulate, and stalk you. His psychiatric issues explain his behavior, but don't excuse it. You were victimized by someone skilled at exploitation." Iron Will MMA became an unexpected support community. Other students, learning the full story of Derek's harassment, shared their own experiences with controlling partners or family members. The self-defense classes Ryan taught took on new meaning, not just as physical technique, but as psychological empowerment against those who would dominate through intimidation. My relationship with Ryan deepened through the crisis. He'd never tried to control my responses or take over my agency, instead supporting my choices while providing protection without domination. The contrast with Derek was so stark, it reframed my understanding of healthy partnership. Ryan respected boundaries Derek would have violated, supported independence Derek had tried to crush, celebrated achievements Derek would have minimized. 6 months after Derek's sentencing, I received an unexpected letter forwarded through the court system. Derek had written from the psychiatric facility, a rambling 15-page document that oscillated between apology and justification. The therapeutic team had apparently encouraged him to write it as part of treatment, believing it showed progress, but the content revealed how superficial his insight remained. He apologized for misunderstanding boundaries, but spent pages explaining how he'd only been trying to protect me. He acknowledged his actions were inappropriate, but maintained Ryan was dangerous and had manipulated me against him. He claimed to understand now that he needed to respect my decision, but included thinly veiled suggestions that maybe someday when he was better, we could talk again. The fundamental inability to accept that I'd never belonged to him, that no apology would create reconciliation, remained evident throughout. "You don't owe him forgiveness," Dr. Reeves said when I brought the letter to therapy. "Forgiveness is for you, not for him, and only if it serves your healing. Derek's apology is about managing his own guilt, not about your well-being. You're allowed to let him carry the consequences of his actions." I drafted a brief response through the court liaison. "I accept your apology for what it's worth, but I have no interest in any form of contact or relationship with you now or ever. I wish you success in your treatment and ask that you respect my explicit request for permanent no contact." The finality felt powerful, claiming closure on my own terms rather than through his manufactured narratives. Ryan proposed to me 8 months after Derek's sentencing, not with grand gesture or public performance, but during a quiet evening at his apartment. "I want to build a life with you based on choice and respect, not control or obligation," he said simply. "If you'll have me, I promise to always honor your autonomy and celebrate your strength." The contrast with Derek's controlling possessiveness was perfect and complete. I said yes without hesitation. 2 years after Derek's sentencing, I stood in our new house's kitchen watching Ryan teach a women's self-defense seminar in our converted garage gym. The space we'd created together was exactly what I'd envisioned, a safe place where people could learn practical skills without intimidation or machismo performance. 20 women of various ages moved through defensive techniques, their confidence growing visibly with each repetition. Derek remained incarcerated in the psychiatric facility, his treatment ongoing but progress reportedly minimal. His online following had mostly dispersed after documentation of his stalking pattern became public, though a few dedicated believers maintained forums claiming he'd been railroaded by a corrupt system. I didn't follow these communities, didn't check on his status, didn't allow him mental real estate beyond acknowledging past trauma and current freedom. The lifetime restraining order meant Derek could never legally contact me even after eventual release. The facility's therapeutic team had accepted that reconciliation was neither desired nor appropriate, focusing instead on helping Derek accept responsibility and develop healthier relationship patterns for any future partnerships. Whether that treatment would succeed wasn't my concern anymore. I'd reclaimed the parts of myself he'd tried to destroy. My career had flourished with the removal of Derek's constant surveillance. I'd completed my graduate degree in literacy education, published research on trauma-informed teaching practices, and accepted a position training other educators. The work felt meaningful, using my experiences to help others recognize manipulation and control patterns in their own lives. Several teachers I'd trained mentioned that understanding intimate partner violence dynamics helped them identify at-risk students and intervene appropriately. Ryan and I built our relationship on the foundation of mutual respect and clear communication that had been missing in my years with Derek. We discussed boundaries explicitly, checked in about comfort levels, ensured neither person felt pressured or controlled. The health of our partnership served as constant reminder of how dysfunctional my previous normal had been. Jenna remained one of my closest friends, though she'd moved to Seattle for a job opportunity. We video chatted weekly, and she never missed an opportunity to remind me how proud she was that I'd escaped Derek's control and built this new life. "You went from victim to survivor to thriver," she'd say with characteristic directness. "That's the real victory, not Derek being locked up." Travis, the colleague Derek had manipulated to help trap me, had apologized extensively and become an unexpected ally. He'd started volunteering with a domestic violence organization, using his experience of being weaponized by an abuser to educate others about how perpetrators exploit social relationships. His testimony at Derek's trial had been powerful, describing the sophisticated manipulation Derek had used to manufacture the fake workshop scenario. The graffiti vandal who'd targeted my apartment was eventually identified as one of Derek's online followers who'd taken the victim narrative to heart. He'd been arrested, charged, and after learning the full documented history of Derek's stalking, had publicly apologized and advocated for others to recognize how Derek had manipulated his supporters. The incident had effectively destroyed what remained of Derek's online movement, supporters recognizing they'd been exploited by someone skilled at presenting false narratives. On the 5-year anniversary of leaving Derek, I taught a workshop at a domestic violence conference about recognizing subtle control tactics in relationships. The room was packed, mostly women, but some men too, all seeking to understand how abuse operates beneath obvious physical violence. I shared my story not as victim testimony, but as case study in systematic manipulation and eventual liberation. Derek didn't hit me during our relationship, I explained to the audience, but he destroyed my autonomy just as thoroughly through surveillance, isolation, and psychological control. When people think of abuse, they picture black eyes and broken bones. But coercive control operates through thousands of small violations that normalize domination. The question isn't why victims don't leave, but how perpetrators create situations where leaving feels impossible. After the workshop, a young woman approached me privately. "My boyfriend checks my phone constantly," she admitted quietly. "He says it's because he loves me and wants to make sure I'm safe. But hearing you describe Derek's tactics, I recognize so many patterns. I think I need help." I connected her with local resources, gave her my contact information, reminded her that recognizing the problem was the first crucial step. Watching her walk away with literature and referrals, I felt the purpose that had emerged from my trauma. Derek had tried to destroy me, but instead his actions had created an educator and advocate who could identify his tactics and help others escape similar dynamics. Ryan and I never had children, a mutual decision based on our fulfillment through teaching and community building. Our garage gym had expanded into a full nonprofit organization offering free self-defense classes to domestic violence survivors, scholarship programs for at-risk youth, and instructor training in trauma-informed teaching methods. The work felt like victory every day, transformation of past pain into present purpose. Derek's parents had reached out once through intermediaries, hoping I might provide a letter supporting their son's eventual release. I declined without anger or vindication, simply stating that my safety and well-being required permanent separation from their son. They'd been hurt by the response but eventually accepted it, recognizing that Derek's actions had consequences extending beyond legal punishment. The last time I thought about Derek deliberately was on our wedding day, 3 years after his sentencing. Ryan and I had married at a small ceremony surrounded by chosen family, people who'd supported us through the crisis and celebrated our healthy partnership. As I danced with my husband in our backyard reception, I reflected briefly on the woman I'd been during those 18 months with Derek, isolated and controlled, versus the woman I'd become. Derek had taught me what I wouldn't tolerate. Ryan had shown me what I deserved. The contrast was complete education in relationship dynamics, one toxic and one healthy, one destructive and one generative. I'd needed to experience both to understand the difference fully, though I wouldn't wish that education on anyone. Sometimes people ask if I'm angry at Derek, if I carry resentment about the years he stole through his systematic campaign of control and stalking. The answer is complicated. I'm angry at what he did, at the trauma that required years of therapy to process, at the fear he'd instilled that occasionally still surfaces in unexpected moments. But I'm not consumed by that anger. Don't let it define my present reality. Derek's greatest failure was his assumption that destroying my autonomy would create lasting control. Instead, his actions generated resolve to never accept that treatment again, from anyone, ever. His abuse made me stronger not through some redemptive transformation of suffering, but through hard-won recognition of warning signs and non-negotiable boundaries. Ryan finished the seminar and the women filed out energized, several stopping to thank him for creating safe space to learn. He walked over and wrapped his arms around me from behind, the gesture affectionate but never possessive, supportive but never controlling. This was love without strings attached, partnership without power dynamics, respect without the expectation of subservience. "What are you thinking about?" Ryan asked, kissing the top of my head. "How far we've come," I replied honestly, "and how Derek's attempt to destroy me ultimately just cleared the way for something better. That's the truth the Dereks of the world never understand. Control isn't love, surveillance isn't protection, and isolation isn't safety. The people who try to diminish others reveal their own profound insecurity, not their strength. And the ones who survive that diminishment often emerge with clarity about what real love actually looks like. Derek remains in treatment, his eventual release uncertain. When that day comes, he'll be middle-aged, his prime years spent in psychiatric confinement, his reputation permanently destroyed by documented evidence of his actions. He'll be subject to lifetime supervision, prohibited from ever contacting me, required to maintain treatment. Whatever life he builds afterward will be haunted by consequences of choices he made during those years of obsessive control. I don't celebrate his suffering, but I don't regret his consequences either. Derek had countless opportunities to choose differently, to respect boundaries, to accept that my autonomy wasn't his to control. He rejected every off-ramp, escalated rather than retreated, manufactured crises rather than accepting reality. His current situation is entirely the product of his own deliberate choices. Meanwhile, I'm building something beautiful, with someone who understands that love means celebrating your partner's independence, not crushing it. Ryan's strength comes from discipline and skill, not from dominating those weaker than himself. Our relationship works because we chose each other freely, not because either of us trapped the other through manipulation and fear. Sometimes students in my workshops ask if I've forgiven Derek. I tell them forgiveness isn't necessary for healing, that demanding it places unfair burden on survivors to absolve their abusers. I've made peace with what happened without requiring Derek's redemption or my own emotional labor to release him from guilt. He's not my problem to fix or my burden to carry. He's simply someone who hurt me, faced consequences, and from whom I'm permanently free. That freedom is the victory Derek never anticipated. He'd calculated every variable in his campaign of control, except my eventual refusal to remain controlled. His greatest weapon was fear, and the moment that fear lost its power over me, his entire structure collapsed. All his planning, all his manipulation, all his threats became irrelevant against someone who simply stopped complying with his narrative. So when people ask about my abusive ex who threatened every man in my life, I smile and tell them about the MMA fighter who's 6'5", and taught me that real strength protects without dominating. I tell them Derek's in psychiatric confinement where he belongs. And I tell them I'm thriving in ways Derek tried to prevent but ultimately couldn't stop. Because that's the real story, not Derek's campaign of control, but my refusal to remain controlled. Not his attempted destruction, but my reconstruction. Not his power, which was always illusory, but my power, which was always real, even when he convinced me otherwise. Derek thought he could possess me through intimidation. Instead, he pushed me towards someone who showed me what actual partnership looks like. His failure is complete, permanent, and entirely deserved. And my freedom is the ultimate revenge, living well despite his best efforts to destroy me. That's justice. Not forgiveness, not redemption, not some therapeutic release of resentment. Just the simple satisfaction of building a good life that Derek tried to prevent and failed to stop. He gets to live with his consequences. I get to live without him. The math couldn't be clearer about who actually won.